Joining me today is Jodi Archambault, a great friend of mine and a great friend of Indian country, who is continuing to work to raise awareness of the challenges that Native American people face, but also the contributions that they're making. And Jodi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Senator Heitkamp. It's always a pleasure to visit with you.
Well, I can't help but think as we're looking at Black Lives Matter, and, I've been trying with every kind of national appearance that I make to raise awareness that it's not just African Americans who have been victims of long-term systemic racism and actually genocide, that we have to not forget our first Americans, not forget Native Americans. And, nothing has really been said or I think elevated the way it should be, given what's happening on the Navajo right now with COVID, given that we continue to see missing and murdered Indigenous women and people not paying attention, and we haven't yet been able to pass even the simplest of legislation that would provide security, or at least some hope for security for Native women. And I wanted to visit with you on the hot dish about how is the Native American community responding to what they're seeing right now in terms of the massive protests and both epidemics that have hit Native people, both the epidemic of racism and the epidemic of corona. I don't think there's enough attention to what's going on. So I wanted to visit with you about what you're hearing and what we could do to elevate the challenges that Native American folks face right now.
Well, I think these are great questions, and the time is now to really look at the systemic racism that has been brought to light. First of all, I want to just thank and stand in complete solidarity to the with the Black Lives Matter movement. The entire country is gripped with these questions that we've been putting off for a long time, as it relates to incarceration rates, the way that the police forces look at different kinds of situations with different lenses of bias and culture built in these organizations. I also understand that there's times to, at least for myself, there's times to be a good ally by listening. I'm trying to learn how to be a good listener when it comes to what's affecting Black Americans, because I know that if I can listen, I'm hoping that people will listen to Native Americans in some order of sequence, or if people can draw the distinctions. You, of course, represent North Dakota, which has a large population of Native Americans, so you're very familiar with the issue. But by and large, American Indians, Alaska Natives, or Native Americans, if you will, have been largely made invisible in the larger politic, not just in the politic, but in curriculum, in the news. And only in certain instances we get the limelight. And usually it is a story of the horrific situation that's happening. So I'm trying to understand how to be a good ally, how to learn about what's happening to other peoples in these systems, and stand with them, and also behind the scenes educate as much as I can about how related the two issues are. When it comes to the mass incarceration, the high rates of incarceration of Black people, I'm more familiar with the Native American incarceration disparities. And in North and South Dakota, we have some of the highest rates across the country for any race. This isn't one to say, I'm not saying that we have it worse, or there's no comparison for the sheer numbers of Black Americans, Black men, women, and children that are locked up behind bars. But there's also a similarly related problem with American Indians. And I've lived through some of the ways that happens, being a citizen of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and also dually with the state of North Dakota. So it's always good to think about how to be a good ally. But I appreciate you making the point that there are related issues in Native American communities. When it comes to COVID, those are some of the similar issues, and we can talk more about that. But the health disparities fall into the same kind of category, where not a lot of people know that there's a lot of disparity there to begin with, and that just exacerbates when COVID does hit the reservations.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, and I remember when Al Franken and I were on the committee, we just said, look, our colleagues who have no experience at all, especially with Plains tribes, I mean, they have no awareness, and it was always a challenge to try and raise your hand and say, hey, pay attention over here. One of the kind of similarities that I always talk about in my work with childhood trauma is the fact that you have generational trauma that's passed on from generation to generation, given the abominable kind of treatment that both African Americans and Native Americans have received historically. And so these things, when people say, well, look at the rate of chronic disease, and you want to say, well, there's biological reasons for that, and we haven't addressed them, and we haven't given quality health care, both in the African American community and certainly not in the Native American community, even though it's been promised and contracted for. And so there's just so much more that needs and could be done. I want to ask you something. I've been watching very closely as so many of the activists have been approaching statues that glorify systemic racism and racist history. I was I smiled a big smile when I saw the statue of Columbus go down, Jodi. I have to tell you, because people can say, well, why would you do that? And you want to say, look, this is exactly why you do it, because now people are wondering, what is it about Columbus? And when they look into the history of what happened with the invasion of the Americas by the Spaniards and by people like Columbus, the story is horrific. And so I was wondering, what were your feelings when you saw that statue in Minnesota of Columbus going down?
Well, I just want to say that it's been a long time coming. I come from a family who's been calling attention to the Columbus statue in Denver, Denver, Colorado, AIM. There's a lot of my aunts and cousins and uncles who've been marching in Denver for a long time, and so this is really something that's been way long overdue in terms of the sort of honoring and memorializing that America tends to stick to or cling to. The activists that came before the people that were standing there today, people like Suzanne Harjo, Clyde Belcourt, there's a lot of folks, my Aunt Jolynn, a lot of folks who've been doing awareness, raising awareness on the issue. Columbus was absolutely uh, a rapist and a pillager, to put it
Oh, no.
lightly. I mean, I'm not going to mince words here, and the idea that we would continue to honor him like he was a hero. He was actually lost. Everybody knows he was lost, and that he didn't discover anything. We were already here, and we're still here. So it's quite a uh, it's a I think it's going to be a sea change. I mean, I think these bases are going to probably change. I think if not under Trump, and eventually the names of the bases that honor some of the Confederate soldiers, a lot of American icons and symbols that harken back to hate and genocide, they're going to be questioned, and this is the beginning of a new day. It's really an exciting time.
Well, and I certainly hope that as we are looking at Fort Bragg and Fort Hood and understanding the history of these Confederate leaders and being educated really for the first time for many of us, that we don't forget that we have a national holiday honoring Columbus that should dramatically change. And anyone who, I mean, we can link to this site. Some of the amazing work that's being done to educate people on the kind of abuse that Columbus inflicted. I sent a note to a friend of mine who's very active in the sex trafficking world, and I said Columbus, the original sex trafficker of Native women. You know, and why we honor him is beyond me. But I just had to say that it was great to see that as part of the discussion, because I think sometimes it gets forgotten. And it's not, Italian Americans who may feel like Columbus is their hero need to better understand who he was, and what he did. And so, you know, and people say, well, these are symbols and this is our heritage. And you want to say, but you're ignoring the heritage of so many other people. And it's just not, I mean, it's just a time for that discussion. And I certainly hope that these concerns regarding other kinds of idealizing historical figures, that we get better educated about who those folks are. And, you know, it's so interesting. And I try not to be overtly political on this hot dish, but I'm just like amazed that the president is going to Tulsa on the anniversary of that massacre against. I said it would be like going to Wounded Knee. I mean, what happened in Tulsa is comparable to the atrocity and the massacre of Wounded Knee, and then he picks Jacksonville on the anniversary of the event 60 years ago was a Ku Klux Klan massacre. And then his first fundraising is with the pipeline company that was the target and certainly the subject of great concern in terms of how they treated Native Americans on Standing Rock. That's his first travel out of the country for a political event. It's like, I don't know if the president is trying to, you know, kind of send a subliminal message, or if he just needs more education about how people feel and how he could do better to reunite the country.
Well, I think that a couple of things, that the country is in a polarized war of narrative. And I believe that the current president, I wouldn't give him too much credit, but I would definitely really examine the ways that he's been influenced by, you know, his father, who was a former Klansman, and how I think a lot of Americans have been embracing that message that he's giving about race, and they're not subtle. They're pretty overt. And for the people who don't understand how overt they are, that is a testament to our education system, because our education system is the first way that we make race invisible. Race relations, we hide the truth of America. We hide the truth of the roots of slavery, the roots of theft, land theft, and chicanery that you know happened in the early parts of America, and then it continues to happen. And until we address that in a meaningful way, in a broad-based way, I think we're going to continue to have these difficulties, and it's further exacerbated by social media. But I do think that it is deliberate. It isn't something that is happenstance. I think this direction that this president is headed would have everybody at war next year or this fall, if he could have his way. And so I think it's up to the other Republican leadership for somebody to step out and be a true leader that is looking towards the values of accommodation, peace, reaching. You dealt with the issue of reaching across the aisle. I'm talking about reaching across the race divide with experience, and reaching across the perspective divide, um, because some people really do believe, in their heart of hearts, that he's right.
If we, so many people listen to the podcast who really don't have any kind of experience, that many of the folks that have been kind of loyal followers of the podcast watched with horror what happened with Native American voting rights, and obviously still ask me, how are things going. But I think this is a moment to expand the kind of awareness. And so, Jodi, if you could just take a few minutes to kind of tell people, number one, kind of how they can get better educated who listen to this about what historically has happened with Native people, Indigenous people in our country, but also to have a discussion about how they can respectfully be part of the solution, and part of the change. What would you say to the folks who are listening who say, "What can I do?"
Well, first of all, I think becoming educated, learning is a lifelong process, and it really is possible to become better educated. And I think, in your position as both former Attorney General and former Senator of North Dakota, that education doesn't just happen in a book. That type of education happens with interfacing with actual people. And I'm not saying that Native Americans are available to everybody all the time, but there's certainly social events in a non-COVID era, powwows. There's rodeos. There's a lot of different venues where there could be more interaction, at least locally in North Dakota, but across the country, people really don't even know whose land they're on. So understanding the land that America is built on, there's been a movement of land acknowledgement. So every time somebody does a public event, whether it's native or non-native, there's a land acknowledgement of the people who are still there or who were wiped out or removed to a different part of the United States. But all of America is indigenous land, whether it is now in the present tense or not. We believe that we actually don't belong to or the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. So it's still a part of us, even if there's no physical Native Americans in places like, say, Kentucky, or in places like Alabama, Ohio. They're all homes to some peoples at some point. So I think understanding where you're at. The other thing is to follow National Congress of American Indians. Follow, if you're living in a city, see what other kinds of organizations are out there. Go and visit with those organizations and see what the needs are. There's a lot of urban Indian organizations. More than half of Native Americans live off the reservation. The other thing is, there really does need to be a push for better education on Native Americans. And that could be something every single state legislature can take up as a high priority. They could understand who was there. They can understand the past as well as the present. And that can change the course of how American Indians and Alaska Natives are treated in policy, in the media, in cultural types of undertakings in Hollywood, or court decisions. All of that basic information, most people don't even know we're here. And there's a great website. It's called Illuminatives. And that is a place where you can learn about the erasure of Native Americans and what are some active things we can do. And so the K through 12 Native American Education for All is one of their initiatives. They've been working hard at that. There's also a great deal of states that have been making progress to this end. And that's something that is for the kids, but adults can get involved in that now, in standing in solidarity or standing as an ally with Native Americans, who could be pushing that. The other thing is the I don't know if people know this, but Native Americans have next to it's less than 1% of all philanthropic giving goes to Native Americans. So it's more like 2/3% that goes to Native American causes. So people are often wanting to help. They don't know how or where to donate. The first thing that I would say is that there are a lot of really good funds out there. There's like the Native American Rights Fund. That's a 50-year-old organization that's been fighting for Native rights. There's the National Congress of American Indians. There's Indian Collective. There's Illuminatives. There's all kinds of opportunities to give. And I'm going to say this really explicitly, to Native-led organizations.
Yeah.
Native-led, because there's a lot of people out there that call themselves partners, or there's just a lot of non-Native sort of charity organizations out there that help a little bit on the fringes, but don't do anything to build the capacity and to partner with the people on the reservations and in urban centers. So those are some things that I would just recommend. And we're everywhere. Like, Native Americans are everywhere. There are people in all parts of this country.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would add to this is that there are a lot of efforts. I think uh, nationwide, but certainly take a look at what many states have done. I think South Dakota does not have a Columbus Day celebration. They have an Indigenous People Day where they actually have that conversation, similar to the kind of conversation you would have on Martin Luther King Day. People in the Democratic Party who still hold Jefferson Jackson dinners, stop doing that. Jackson basically ignored the Supreme Court and was one of the greatest abusers of presidential abusers of Native Americans. And so don't just accept the current history as we've been taught in school, but better understand what that history looks like. And I always recommend, as people think about it, Color of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. And it's a book about Native Americans who had mineral rights, who were systematically stripped of those mineral rights by horrible people, and the courts looked the other way. And so when you look at this history, you assume that it ended, at the birth of the country. Forget that. I mean, it was just, even as the westward movement went, you can go back in the 20s and 30s and understand voting rights challenges that Native people have had. And so I think, Jodi, we will put up the recommendation that you had for various groups and have people look into those groups. But you make such a great point, which is, so many people say they're helping and maybe they help on the fringe. I used to smile because I would get groups in certainly in North Dakota who were angry at the tribes for not sharing their statistics. And I want to say, well, about whether it was domestic violence or whatever the issue was. And I would say, that's because you take the statistics and you collect the money, and none of that money ever finds its way back to great organizations who are working on these challenges right on the reservation. And
Right.
so it's incumbent on all of us, even those of us who belong to organizations that profess that we're doing things that are helpful, but none of that ever finds its way back.
Yeah,
And so,
I do want to name off a couple of other books. God is Red by Vine Deloria. There's a fiction book. It's called Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. It's just one of my favorite all-time books. And then there's a book on Crazy Horse by Joseph Marshall. And a couple of things happen a lot of times when we talk about Native Americans. One is that Americans get stuck in the past. So they really see us as what one would call anachronistic stature. So we're seen as like not really part of the present day. And so when we think about the past travesties, the past genocide, That's an area that really dictates how people see us. And I just want to point out that the what I'm seeing with COVID is not necessarily it is worse for places like Navajo, San Felipe, Mississippi, Band of Choctaw. Horrible rates there. But I also would say that despite all of the issues and the problems that Native Americans have, we're very resilient. We're very ready for suffering. So in terms of like no food, we know how to hunt. We still garden. People who haven't gardened in years, when COVID hit, everybody wanted to garden. There's resiliency in our languages, in the way that we look at things like the possibility of not having food. And I think we're very well positioned to handle a pandemic, even though the disparity rates dictate like really horrible things happening at places like Navajo. You look at places like North and South Dakota, especially South Dakota, who've just taken it upon themselves to close their borders, despite what the governor would like to see. The governor is representing like 3 farmers or ranchers out there. That's my opinion. But they close their borders for the safety of their people, because nobody's going to come in there with lots and lots of money and ventilators. We are in the Great Plains. Our demographic, if COVID takes off, we're still not in the clear. We are still scared for our lives. But that resiliency is being able to act and being able to understand that Native Americans have been through life and death pandemics since contact. And so this is a time where I don't like to just sit and dwell on the negative things of Indian country. I think America has a lot to learn from us on things like scarcity, on things like um, mental health issues, because we've been dealing in a mental health kind of insanity with the federal government since they landed, since they were established, since the Europeans landed, and we've been, surviving the abuse of colonialism. So we know how to handle that, and we know how to get through it, and we're actually I just say this because there is a song and dance that happens in DC, and you've been a part of that song and dance, and it's like, we're going to tell you how pitiful and how bad off we are, and then you might give us more money, and that hasn't even worked out very well for us. So the narrative that we make about ourselves, I'm done with listening to how people think about my people and my relatives. I'm ready to, like, let's teach other people how to survive in isolation with no money and no food. Like, we've done that for a long time.
Yeah, we have so much to learn, and the reason why I wanted to do this, Jodi, is you started out saying you're listening, um, and I think as much as those of us who think, well, I have a pretty good handle on this, we really don't. I haven't lived your experience. I haven't lived, the experience that you just outlined, and it's time for all of us to listen. But it also is time for Native American leaders to assert their rights, like they are in South Dakota, to say, look, we're we've been through a pandemic before. You guys brought us smallpox, and we're well aware of the diseases that you can bring us, and this is what we're going to do to protect ourselves. And I just hope that we don't just see this as an opportunity to talk about the African American experience, but that we also include Native Americans and Indigenous people in that conversation, because I think we all have a lot to learn, and we all have a lot of good opportunities to listen. But we have to have people who are also talking if we're going to listen.
Right. And I do want to say that I have no idea what it means to be Black in America. I'm not Black. I can only speak from my lived experience, and I will say that the issues that are being raised in America right now, I've experienced on a personal level. I've experienced uh, hate crimes. I was walking, I was pregnant with my youngest son, George, and I was walking in Bismarck, and a car full of young kids, about three high schoolers, drove by and threw chicken nuggets at me. And I was 7 months pregnant. I was visibly pregnant, and they threw nuggets at me, chicken nuggets at me, and called me a dirty savage, among other very bad words. And that experience was, I had an exclamation point on that experience, because I called the cops, gave them the license plate number, and the police went to the house and asked them if they did it, and they said no. So the police came back to me and said, well, they said they didn't do that, and so we can't charge them with anything. And with that experience, I mean, just basically, uh, I understand I understand what it means when I say something like that. And then on the other shoe, I drive by some friends of mine last year, they're Native Americans. They were being accused of stealing a bike by a couple of white guys who looked like they were on drugs, frankly. And the policeman detained my friend and her sons, who were like 6'5", Native American young boys, and was demanding them show a receipt for the bike. And I just said, this accusation is unfounded, and you're not asking them for a receipt. Go ask them for a receipt. Why are you asking my friend for a receipt? If possession is the only thing that you just have to say something and then it's yours, if that's the law, this I'm living in a different reality, because that's not how it works normally. Usually you don't have to turn over. I could just tell the cop, your cop car is mine. Does that mean it's mine? No. So I know there's an unfair application of the law. It's unequal. It's totally different situations. Completely, we're not heard. We're not listened to. We get accused, and it's on us to prove that we're we're innocent. And that kind of power that's just lorded over our people happens in the Dakotas too. It's happening with Governor Nome and those borders. Like, all they're doing is protecting. They're just protecting their elders, for criminy out loud. That's all they're doing.
Yeah.
Those tribes are doing nothing but protecting their language. The impact of having COVID in Indian country means we lose our language, we lose our elders with tons of cultural knowledge. This is it for us. I mean, we don't have a second chance at saving our language. This is it. We're on the verge of a lot of difficulties that the rest of the United States doesn't understand, and certainly Kristi Noem doesn't understand. We have to do this. This is all we have left.
I mean, I think people have watched it and wondered, you know, why why it doesn't seem like there's much conversation going on. There's just, she's just saying, I'm going to do this or I'm going to court. And you want to say, well, maybe, Governor, you should sit down and talk about how collectively we can all protect language, all protect our elders. And I will tell you, one of the things with COVID that has just makes my blood run cold is how accepting people are of, oh, it's just old people. I'm like, these are our grandpas and our grandmas, and these are people who have so much more to give us. And if it's not your grandma, I guess we're not going to worry about them. But like you said, the elders represent culture, and people, again, a real opportunity to understand why Cheyenne feels so adamant about why they need to protect their borders and why they need to protect their community. No one questions when President Trump says you can't fly here from China, but everybody says, well, if this is your sovereign land and we're not going to let you come on to our sovereign land at a time of pandemic, that's somehow radical. It's not radical. This is exactly what people are doing throughout the country and what governments are doing, our national government is doing. So how is this radical, Jodi?
It's also not radical because if you look at what happened in Key West, they closed Key West. The elders of Key West closed Key West. Who do you think lives in Key West? It's certainly not minority elders, and nobody's freaking out and making them open up their community because it's beyond what the state is allowing. I mean, this is another situation. That's a Republican governor. He's not trying to force those guys. They're a vulnerable community. If anything, Kristi Noem should be sending the state police there to help them to deal with the non-native cowboys and ranchers who are the ones that are complaining about this. It's an inconvenience of about 20 minutes is why Kristi Noem, and it's literally a few people. It's a handful of people who can't take their regular drives. I go to Pine Ridge all the time. It takes me about another 40 minutes to go to Pine Ridge from Bismarck.
Yeah.
I haven't gone lately, but I'm not going to complain for that 40 minutes if it means that I'm saving lives. If that means that I'm going to have to be inconvenienced a little bit. Nobody's making the case. Nobody listened to the arguments of the tribes when, south of Mandan here was closed down. Nobody cared that we were inconvenienced. A whole goddamn 6,000 people who go to Bismarck and shop every day. We were inconvenienced too when they had the no DAPL roadblock up there, and nobody cared about that. Nobody was running and saying, "Oh my God, you got to open this road up."
Yeah, and these are the examples and the situations that when people understand this from the perspective, from a different perspective, hopefully change will come, Jodi. And but I wanted so much to have you on and someone with such an incredible depth of knowledge and commitment to basically talk about how this could be a moment for equality that bridges not just the African American community, but other disparate and long-standing historic racist applications of the law. And so you have just, what an incredible depth of knowledge. And I hope you continue to speak out and encourage other people to speak out. And I hope that we can continue this conversation as time goes on, because as you know, we started the organization One Country, and we did that to make people more aware of rural America. But we also have an opportunity, it seems, to get people to understand who lives in rural America, because I think there's always this attitude that it's American Gothic, grandpa and grandma and family farmers, but it's much more diverse than what people realize, but it's not without its challenges. So Jodi, thank you so much, and good luck, and I hope I see you in Bismarck soon. And again, if there's anything more you want us to post on our website, because I know a lot of people will be very curious, we're willing to put up links to organizations that you would recommend, as well as literature and books that can help people better understand the challenges.
Thanks for listening. And if you're really interested and you want more information and want to actually see visually what we're talking about, join us on social media at onecountryproject.org.